Hello, welcome back to Election Time News. You want some political summations, poll reviews, nonpartisan predictions, reviews, and compilations on other political forecasters. Today is Sunday, November 3rd, 2024, and today I'll be doing the second of my two last best case scenario videos. Today is going to be for the Republican Party under Donald Trump. If you like content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Do me a favor and click on that bright red button below. Also, make sure to join the Discord, links in the description and on my YouTube homepage. So, here is my Google Sheet where I have all my guesses, and so today we're going to be looking at this Republican best case scenario column here for every single state. So going in poll closing time order, we're going to be starting off with the state of Indiana. This is going to be safe Republican. It basically is in any situation whatsoever. 16 points for Donald Trump. Here I have it going to him by 18% in his best case, because that's generally going to be going back to more 2016 margins in, some of those more suburban counties. Monroe County is going to swing to the right. Marion, Lake County, St. Joseph County are moving to the right again. And a bit of gaining nationwide in the more rural areas. Kentucky, same sort of thing. Losses in the rurals, losses in the cities for the Democrats and slight gains in the rurals. They're basically already all maxed out, but 28 points for Donald Trump. That is going to, again, be right about on par. Not even actually as good as he did in 2016. But I definitely don't see, with the gains the Democrats are making in uneducated white voters, I don't think there's going to be all that much that can be done in some of these larger areas. But still, there's going to be a huge shift to the right in Fayette County, Jefferson County, and again, of course, across the state. So that is still going to be quite a considerable shift to the right. Then looking over at Virginia, this is going to be a much tighter race. Donald Trump does not win, but it's going to be a 6-point margin of victory. That is a likely margin for Kamala Harris, and that would be basically having the margin from 2020. It would be just barely less close than 2016. And what we're looking at here is mainly the continual growth of the Northern Virginia region and, some regions outside of some of these other cities that, have gotten more and more blue, especially the Virginia Beach region. This would probably flip back red. There would be less turnout in this region, but it's still just growing so fast and moving to the left so fast that it still would be gains from the 2016 cycle. Moving on to Vermont, it is still going to be absolutely safe blue. However, it's only going to be 32 points, which is going to be quite a bit of a drop, 3.5 point drop from 2020. Going to be more, just generally losses across the state, but especially up in this northern region where it's a bit more Republican. Down here, you end up with 40s and 30s, and then down here you have about 11. But here you only have 9, 4, and then actually a red county in the state of Vermont. But it's going to be quite a bit closer there. Then we have South Carolina. It's going to be a 13-point margin that is going to be strongly safe here, and that's going to be quite a bit of considerable gains among black voters, especially in some of these regions, especially in these urban regions. It's going to swing quite a bit to the right, flipping Jasper County, holding on to Clarendon and Dillon County, such. And so, especially over here, there would also be a bit less losses in the educated and uneducated white voters populace there, so it'd be very strong. And then lastly, we have the state of Georgia, which would be just barely a tilt Republican margin at a flat 2 points. That would be, again, not even actually closer than it was in 2016, but taking the state back from the Democrats in 2020 by quite a considerable amount. That would be a 2.25 point shift to the right, which would be relatively impressive. But it would be lower turnout in the Atlanta region, and especially out over in Richmond County in this region over here as well. Those more lower turnout in those Democratic regions. Moving on, next is going to be the 30 p.m. closing time. That's going to be Ohio, which is going to be just barely a certain margin. I have it going 10 points. Double digits would just barely be certain. It has to be more than 10 to be safe. But that would be a 10-point margin, which would be the largest victory by any party in Ohio in a relatively long period of time. Going all the way back, we don't see a 10-point victory in the state of Ohio since Bush won it by 11 points in 1988, which is also the last time that the Rust Belt trio voted separate from each other. So this would be the largest victory in the state of Ohio since we had a separate voting Rust Belt trio here. And 1988 was also the last time that any of them voted red until 2016. So those would be very large trends that it would be broken here. This would be a very strong performance for Donald Trump if he were to carry it by 10 points. The state of Ohio, that would mostly be, lower turnout in these regions. Montgomery County probably flip back. Some reducing the losses in the suburban areas across the state. Gaining with these groups across the country would greatly help the Trump campaign. Next is going to be the state of North Carolina. Now, best case scenario for Donald Trump, he's going to win the state of North Carolina by 1.5 points, which is basically a little bit better than he did in 2020. That's still going to be a tilt margin. It's going to go back to being to the left of Georgia, which was actually just broken in 2020. Prior to that, it had basically always been to the left of Georgia, as it basically was the last time that it was bluer or redder than Georgia was in 1996, where Georgia voted for Dole by only 1.2, and North Carolina was by 4.7. And then, of course, the year before that, Georgia voted for Clinton by 0.5 point, and North Carolina for Bush by 0.75 point. So this would be going back to that trend of it being to the left of the state of Georgia, as most likely there would be movements back in some of these urban regions. The suburbs would continue to move to the left, but much less than expected. These rurals would basically max out again, and you'd have less turnout in the urban areas. Moving on to the 8 p.m. poll closing time, all of these would still be safe by high margins over 10%, and conversely, these states would all still be safe over 10% by a large margin. Even Illinois would still be safe, however, be quite a bit closer to not safe. It would probably be closer to about 14 points, which is going to be less than safe in a 15-point. Then that would be a 3-point swing to the right. There would be quite a bit less turnout in Cook County, which would basically just bring the entire state way to the right. And looking at the state of Florida, you would have a much stronger showout for Donald Trump, 6.5 points. That is just under a just under a certain margin. Sorry, at 7 points. That would go to certain, but a likely margin here for Donald Trump in the state of Florida. That would be more than doubling, and that would be almost doubling his margin from 2020, which was in and of itself basically more than a double of his margin in 2016. So this would be a continual huge shift to the right in Florida, and that would certainly bring Rick Scott to a victory in the Senate race there via coattails, just because so few people do split ticket voting in this day and age. Next is going to be the state of Maine. Looking here, it would be 7.5 points for Kamala Harris. That's a certain margin, still a certain margin. It's still just so far to the left. That would still be a 1.5 point drop from 2020. It doesn't move all that much from election to election, so it wouldn't really move that much. Now, certain margin in Maine's 2nd Congressional District being a 9-point victory, that would be quite a bit of a swing to the right, going to 9 points, 1.5 point shift from 2020, as this very white, older rural district would probably move the most. So it could probably end up going up to about 10 points or so, as it voted for Trump by 10.3 in 2016. I think that just the slight gains in those regions would just be just a bit right around 10 points instead of anything a bit over. And then New Hampshire has been moving to the left in the past 2 cycles, but it would still be relatively close. It would be 6 points. That's a likely margin. That would be quite a bit. That would be a 1.5 point drop from 2020 as well. However, in 2016, Clinton just barely held it in her column, but it's moved quite a bit to the left, and I don't think that even a large shift in Trump's direction would move it all that much anymore. And the state of Pennsylvania would be a tilt margin for Donald Trump. This would be a 1-point margin, which would be a quarter point better than he did in 2016, as there would be probably quite a bit more support in these urban regions. And even though he would be losing in some suburban counties like Delaware, Chester, Montgomery, they'd probably move a bit to the left, flip back Northampton, flip back Erie County, and some slight gains in like Allegheny County and Philadelphia County would completely offset the losses in Montgomery, Chester, Berks, Delaware, Monroe, Lackawanna. Potentially even flip Center County based on how college-educated voters ended up voting this cycle. So that's going to be the 8 p.m. poll closing time. Next 8:30 is going to be Arkansas, very, very red state. Not much to change there as far as that's concerned. Arkansas, 31 points. So that's just going to be a ridiculously strong showout. It was 27.5 in 2020. So that would be a considerable shift. Next is going to be the 9 p.m. poll closing time. New York is going to be very very blue, but only down to 16 points. Now, that's a huge drop from 23 in 2020. That would be a lot of gains, especially in New York City, especially because that's the main population center in the state of New York. And that would be, probably about 10 points or so in each and every one of these counties down here. And reducing losses in some of these more suburban areas right near Vermont. So that would be quite a bit of a move to the right in the state of New York. However, that would still be safely for Kamala Harris. Next is going to be the state of Michigan. This would be another tilt red state, just barely flipping it. I actually don't think that he's going to perform as well as he did in 2016 when he flipped it by 0.22, that a quarter of a percent. I think it's going to be even less than that, just a few hundred votes potentially, if anything. I'm not saying it's out of the picture, but I think even just best case with the growth, especially in, their county around Flint, Michigan, Kalamazoo, Saginaw County, Leelanau County, flipping by over 6 points. The growth in the Detroit region against Donald Trump, even in his best case scenario, he just barely flipped the state because of decreased turnout in some of those urban regions. State of Wisconsin, on the other hand, would probably, I think I even have it as only 1 point. I should probably have this closer to 2. Just barely a tilt margin. I could absolutely see this flipping way hard to the right just because of its demographics. 3/4 of a point, it was the reddest, just barely more than Pennsylvania in 2016. 3/4 of a percentage point, I could see it shifting quite a bit to the right. Just because of its demographics again, and it's completely based off of how Madison and with Milwaukee end up voting. Basically, if there's low enough turnout in those two regions, Donald Trump could absolutely take the state by 2 points in his best case. The state of Minnesota, this is going to go blue. It's going to be a likely margin 5 points. Again, that's going to be an increase from 2016 just because of how the general state has shifted. Plus, Tim Walz is going to help boost the ticket a little bit. Not by all that much, though, just because of, movement in some of these suburban counties, especially around the southwest of Minneapolis. Some of these counties, like Rice County and Anoka County, are probably going to flip blue anyways, just because of how close they are. But some of these deep blue counties, like Dakota, Hennepin, and Ramsey specifically, would probably vote quite a bit to the right, which would move the state quite a few points. Then we would have the state of Iowa. This is going to be another one that's going to be 9 points, just because it would probably potentially vote a bit to the left of Ohio this time. Actually, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe 10.25 points or so. So that's going to be a safe margin for Donald Trump here, actually. I'm just filling these other states. I don't think I need to clarify anything on them too much. They're extremely Republican states. And so Iowa would probably vote, again, to the right of Ohio, as it has in both election cycles that voted for Trump in. And so that would probably continue. If anything, would move hard to the right again. And so we would see a very deep red Iowa. Okay. So next is going to be Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Looking at the 2nd District, probably going to be 6 points for Kamala Harris. That is, again, going to be a likely margin. It's just that's just barely a loss from 2020 because this is the target demographic that's moving to the left in the country right now. Suburban educated voters. Same thing in Maricopa County, which is why I don't have Arizona moving that much to the right. I only have it going 1.75 points at the most, which would actually mean that Wisconsin would vote to the right of Arizona for the first time in a very long time. So, just demographics-wise, they're very prone to be moving to the left. Now, of course, the rest of the state for Arizona is probably going to be moving to the right, which is why I do have it at 1.75 points, just while we're talking about it. And it is in that poll closing time. But Nebraska's 2nd district really isn't going to move hard to the right, even if the nation as a whole moves 2 to 3 points in that direction. Then we have the state of Texas. Texas is going to be a solid 8-point victory for Donald Trump. That's a certain margin, which would give him the presidency right there, 289 electoral votes. And so that would be a large raise. That would be 3.5 points more than in 2020. That would be a huge amount of gains in the Rio Grande Valley again, like we saw from 2016 to 2020. And we'd see a lot of dropped support in Travis County and Dallas County, as well as Harris County and Fort Bend County. All of those, reduced turnout in all of those would absolutely drive him to a very strong victory in the state of Texas. Showing up to Colorado, we would have only a 9-point victory for Kamala Harris. That would be a certain margin. That would be quite a bit of a drop. Even though it is the most left-trending state in the entire country, it still has a lot of very Republican regions out here that could definitely move hard to the right in the case that something like that would happen. Denver probably wouldn't move all that much, but 61 points, there's a lot of room for Trump to improve here. So if there were any sort of thing like that to occur, then that would definitely help the state as a whole move very hard to the right. New Mexico. In a best case scenario for Donald Trump, this would definitely be probably around an 8-point victory, 7.5 points for Kamala Harris. That would be a likely margin. That would still be a certain margin for Kamala Harris. However, that would be a 3-point drop from 2020. That would be gains amongst Hispanic voters, Latino voters in the state of New Mexico. Moving on, next is going to be the 11 p.m. poll closing time. We have Montana and Utah, which are both very, very red states. However, Montana would be all the way up to an 18-point victory for Donald Trump. That would basically be, probably closer to like 19 to 20 points. 19.5 is probably more on par with what we might see in a best case scenario. It's not going to be as much as 2016, just because I think of some of these more, again, these gains amongst college non-educated voters would just move the state a bit to the left from where it was in 2016. However, it's still going to be very, very close and undoing basically any gains that were made in 2020 if in those very small regions. And Utah would be all the way up to a 22-point victory, which was 1.5 points more than in 2020. Nevada, the state of Nevada would flip 1.5 points for Donald Trump. These demographics, again, are very good for Donald Trump. Relatively uneducated state, and if Clark County would flip, even by the narrowest of margins, then that would absolutely mean it was over for the Harris campaign. So just based on that, it would definitely be over for the Harris campaign if Clark County was to flip or even get within 2 points. And so that would leave with Idaho going red at 11 p.m. as expected. However, this time it would be 35 points. That's quite a bit of a shift, 4.2% from 2020. And then, of course, we have the West Coast moving, but Oregon, interestingly, which is the closest one out of the three, it went to Clinton by only 11%, so not by all that much. And looking here, Oregon would probably go by around 12.5 points or so, somewhere in there. And so Oregon would be relatively close as far as, competitiveness goes from what we could expect this cycle. And that would definitely show cracking along the west coast again, as we had seen in 2016. Hawaii would go deeply blue as expected. However, it would probably drop below the 30% threshold for the first time in a while, down to 25 points. So it went to Biden by basically 29.5, went to Clinton by 32.25, Biden by 29.5, and then all the way down to 25. That would be another large drop. And then the state of Alaska would be completely safe, 14 points for Donald Trump. And that would be, even in this left-trending state, that would be just a bit less than his victory in 2016. Again, it's a left-trending state, especially in some of these, the regions right around, Anchorage moved to the left, and that is, 145,000 votes right there. Bristol Bay doesn't have all that many, but, Juneau has 18,000 votes right there, and they're all slightly moving to the left. Now, bulk of the votes are, of course, in Fairbanks, but especially Fairbanks North Star, but that, of course, moving to the right would drive the state as a whole towards the right. Just still, the entire state is just moving too far to the left to have it be quite at 2016 levels, which does finish off our best case scenario for Donald Trump, 312 to 226. Donald Trump sweeps all of the swing states, including Nevada, which would mean that he got even better than he did in 2016, especially in the Rust Belt, except for the state of Michigan, which just barely would flip and would be the only state out of there that he would do worse in. So basically, it would be somewhere between 2016 and 2020, while being closer to 2016. So thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for watching. Make sure to not miss my election night live stream, and I will see you all tomorrow.